What do a Sunday dinner, a serving fork, and 3 different last names have in common? You're about to find out in this fun-sized felony. Welcome back to Forgotten Felonies. I'm Monica, and this is a fun-sized felony. Before we begin, no felony is ever fun. I call it fun-sized because the story is short, not because the crime is light or trivial. I just want to let you guys know we're going to have a few fun-sized felonies in a row because there's a whole lot going on this summer for me and for Olivia. So bear with us. There will be more full-sized felonies coming up. And on top of that, I must say to all of you, happy 4th of July weekend. If you're listening while you're standing next to the grill with a serving fork in your hand, don't worry. They're usually perfectly safe. Earlier today, Olivia sent me a screenshot of an article, and she simply said, "Look," in all caps. And I'm glad I did. This is a very intriguing tale for sure. So let's walk back in time to June of 1911, just outside of Bath, Pennsylvania. Before I tell you what happened, I have to tell you about the rabbit hole this case sent me down. The newspapers could not agree on anything. Depending on which article I read, the family's last name was either Clegnac, Lucas, or Deligos. Now, the wife in this pair was called either Helen or Olney. Now, at some point, I threw up my hands and decided that the newspapers clearly couldn't be trusted with the names, so I just had to look elsewhere. And the 1910 census finally settled the mystery. The parents of the family were Joseph and Julia Deligos. Now, let me say that again. The parents of the family were Joseph and Julia Deligos. So, Julia, not Helen, not Olney. They don't even sound close. They were a family of Hungarian immigrants living in Upper Nazareth Township, which was just outside of Bath, Pennsylvania. In 1910, their son, Joseph Jr., was 18 years old, and he had also been born in Hungary. And then, according to the census, they had a surprise baby there in Pennsylvania. So at the age of 41, Julia Deligos gave birth to a little girl who they named Rosa. Rosa was 4 years old in 1910 when that census was taken. The census even has a column where the census taker would write whether or not they spoke English, and if not, what language they spoke. Joseph Sr. was listed as being able to speak English. Julia and Joseph Jr. were listed as speaking Magyar, which is the Hungarian language. And it was left blank for 4-year-old Rosa, which honestly is probably fair. Now that we actually know who these people were, let's get to the crime. Yay! Joseph Deligos worked in the local cement industry, as did many immigrants who settled around Nazareth and Bath during the early 1900s. Like countless working-class families of the era, the Deligoses also rented rooms to several boarders to help make ends meet. Well, on Sunday, June 11th, 1911, everybody had the day off. According to newspaper accounts, the household spent the afternoon celebrating, as was customary in their culture. One newspaper claimed that they consumed a 1/4 barrel of beer and 2 quarts of whiskey before supper. And it said it in a rather cynical way, saying that they were keeping up with their regular Sunday routine. Like, this is what they do every Sunday. And whether that's true or, simply newspaper exaggeration, I think it's safe to say that alcohol was flowing. By evening, Joseph announced that he wasn't planning to go to work the next day, and he ordered Julia to prepare supper for the whole household, including the boarders. So she's making a lot of food. One article says that Joseph then went to his room and he took a nap. And when he woke up, he went into the kitchen and he simply began punching his wife from behind. He landed blow after blow, and she spun around and pushed him off of her. And unfortunately, she had been carving meat when he attacked her, and she still had a knife in one hand and a fork in the other. The next door neighbor said that the couple had been arguing outside in the yard. So he had, a different take on things. And it was quite loud. He could hear their argument from inside his house. And then, he goes to the window and he sees Julia go inside their house. And then he watched Joseph follow her into the house carrying a big stick. Now, whichever way that it happened, we know that the confrontation became physical while Julia was carving into some meat. Julia insisted that she was simply trying to push her husband away in self-defense, and she never intended to stab him with the fork. Well, unfortunately, one desperate shove was all it took. The fork drove into Joseph's chest with tremendous force, just above his heart, and it went in very, very deep. One version of the story says that Joseph fell backward and he hit his head really hard on the stove and it gave him a serious laceration and knocked him out. That version says that he died within 10 minutes on the floor in the kitchen in a pool of blood. Well, that version also says that Dr. F.J. Hahn had been walking by at the time and he heard the commotion from outside the house. So the doctor went inside, but he couldn't do anything to save Joseph DeLagos. Julia was arrested almost immediately, as was her son, Joseph Jr., because they thought he would be a valuable witness. And if you're not familiar with that, they used to actually arrest witnesses and keep them in custody so that they could conduct their investigation without having to hunt people down. So I'm glad they don't do that now. I mean, it seems kind of rude. We want to ask you questions later, so we're going to take your freedom. It's a little bit weird. Anyway, so there's another version of what exactly happened on the night of June 11th. This version is in a newspaper article, of course, but it's written about the findings from the coroner's inquest. This inquest took place on Monday, June 12th, 1911, so it was the day after he was, killed with a fork. A coroner's inquest is when the coroner picks quite a few people to serve on the coroner's jury, and they will look at the body, they will hear evidence, they'll even interview witnesses, and then the jury decides cause and manner of death. And way back then, the coroner could be the person who issued a warrant for arrest if they decided that, they figured out who done it. Well, the version of the story published right after the inquest is probably the one that we ought to believe because they did their due diligence in this inquest, right? They looked into everything, they investigated everything that happened, and according to the coroner's report, despite the injury, Joseph walked outside and sat down on a bench as though nothing serious had happened. But then, only a few minutes later, he fell over dead. Dr. F.J. Hahn had indeed been walking, near the home, and so he saw this and he tried to render aid, but it was too late. So, Joseph DeLagos was dead at 50 years old. The autopsy showed 3 puncture wounds from the fork. That was the only visible injury to his body. One tine had pierced Joseph's left lung, which caused fatal internal bleeding. The serving fork itself told its own story. Newspapers reported that the impact had bent all 3 of the prongs. And that's some incredible force that she used there. The fork was also presented to the coroner's jury as evidence during the inquest. Now, at first, authorities treated the case as murder. But after hearing testimony at the coroner's inquest, District Attorney McKean changed his mind. After all, a neighbor who had known the couple back in Hungary described hearing the fight and seeing portions of the struggle. He saw him go in with this big wooden stick. Now, combined with the physical evidence, prosecutors concluded that Julia had likely been defending herself rather than outright attacking her husband. Instead of pursuing a murder charge, officials indicated that if any criminal charge was appropriate at all, it would likely be involuntary manslaughter. On June 17th, 1911, there's a teeny tiny blurb in the paper that says Joseph DeLagos was buried the day before. And then there's nothing else about it. Literally, there's nothing else about it. We don't know if Julia faced charges of involuntary manslaughter. We don't know if it was just dismissed. I mean, it probably was dismissed, or maybe there'd be more news about it, right? But yeah, there's truly just nothing. Even Julia DeLagos herself disappears completely from the papers. Like, she is not mentioned again. She wasn't even in the census records. Well, completely by chance, I got so lucky. I happened to stumble upon a little blurb in January of 1914. So this is like 2.5 years later. And it said that a marriage license was issued to a Mr. John Gornick and a Mrs. Juliana DeLagos, both of Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And the fact that they call her Mrs. means that she had been married before. So I went to look at the 1920 census, and sure enough, I found John Gornick and his wife, Julie Gornick. So Juliana was actually Julie. At the time of the 1920 census, 50-year-old John Gornick and his son from his previous marriage were both working at the cement mill. And 52-year-old Julie was the keeper of a boarding house, and they had 4 boarders at the time, all 4 of them working at the cement mill. And I know this because they were all on the census listed below the Gornicks to show that they lived in the same household. So her life after everything happened was almost exactly as it had been before Joseph's death. After all of the tragedy, she appears to have rebuilt the life that she knew. As strange as this story is, I think my favorite part wasn't the murder weapon. That's certainly what grabbed my attention and sucked me in. But the best part for me was untangling the mystery that the newspapers accidentally created by giving me 3 different surnames for the family. I mean, you should have seen me. I was just going crazy digging through all kinds of things to try to figure this out. Well, sometimes researching these old cases, it feels like putting together multiple puzzles at the same time. I mean, first you figure out what happened, and then sometimes you have to figure out who it actually happened to. In this case, the latter was definitely the harder puzzle to put together. This has been a fun-sized felony.